Welcome, everyone, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour, the best dang game dev podcast on the planet. Today, we are talking about AI, both behavioral and its use as a tool in game development.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Welcome all to our live magical podcast where we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Velventhal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy, and today we're doing one of our patented community episodes. That means that rather than having a single guest, you will be hearing from multiple people from our audience on a single topic. These episodes tend to be a little bit more community oriented. We're all learning as peers and discussing something and figuring out how we feel about it. AI. Oh boy, that's going to be the topic for today. We polled the audience to figure out what exactly we would focus on in this community episode, and we landed on AI, both behavioral AI, meaning the use of AI in games, making an AI agent do certain things, behave certain ways, as well as the use of AI in tooling, so for us to become better game developers. I would love to start by asking the audience, I'm going to read a couple of these comments, what your general beliefs are about the use of AI in game development. And I'm talking like ethically. What do you think about AI's use case in game development? Do you think it's okay to use? Do you think it is inherently wrong? Do you think you're somewhere in between where it's a little bit more gray? At the Indie Game Academy, our general stance is that AI is Pandora's box. It has already been opened, it is here, and it is definitely not going to go away for better or for worse. Now, that doesn't really say anything about what we actually believe as far as the use of AI, whether it's right to use AI. It's just a fact, I think. I don't think there's any arguing that AI is here. That means, though, that what we believe in terms of the use of AI is that it will only hurt you to refuse to use it. I absolutely want us, and the Indie Game Academy believes in, pushing for a more ethical use case of AI, and in particular, the consent of training data. That, in my mind, is one of the things that is most wrong about AI right now. It basically trawls people's data, and that means people's pictures, people's videos, people's text, people's voice lines even these days, which is wild, and more or less steals that data in order to output an aggregate, which is what you're actually getting at the other end of a ChatGPT request. That aspect of AI, in my opinion, is completely wrong and it needs to be done far more ethically and consensually. You need to be able to say this cannot be used for AI, or you need to be able to get credit, or you need to be able to get paid for the use. That scraping is the part that I think is most wrong. That said, as an individual, especially as a student here at the Indie Game Academy, I think it really does only hurt you if you refuse to use it. AI is an incredibly powerful tool. There are really intense ways that we can use it, and then there are much more simple ways that we can use it. And I encourage everyone to start playing around with AI tools, but also do your due diligence to make sure AI is used as ethically as possible. We've got a couple of opinions here. Getting a lot of fantastic gifts, it looks like. Let's see. So Roberto says AI should be used for inspiration and assistance. I like that. John has no opinion on generative AI as they are only tools. Concept art is fine, says Joe Fox. Chero says, has a potential for ideation, but no AI-generated assets should ship in the final product. Yes. A lot of this is stuff that I can absolutely echo and believe in as well. I think where AI really falls best is as a sort of creative assistant. It's something that can help you figure out a problem or give you inspiration or ideas. And that's actually how I tend to use it myself. So in industry, I'm a game designer, as most of you know. And the way that I tend to use AI these days is as a sort of like brainstorming partner. So most recently, for instance, I'm working on some high quality Sims mods, which has been really interesting. And I had to come up with potential names for some characters. And I wanted the audience to actually come up with those names. So I had AI poop me out a bunch of very generic names to use as temporary names for these characters. So that's a great example. In the past, I did a crafting system for Paradox Interactive where you could cut gemstones as a part of this crafting system. And I asked AI to give me a list of gemstones and what order people would learn how to cut them for the sake of my progression. And then I asked it to give me an explanation of that order. And it included a bunch of stuff about like the Mohs hardness and things like that. And that was good enough for me to say, like, yeah, sure, this is the order in which we will actually make these gemstones unlocked. So those are some examples of how we might use AI. You can use it to brainstorm game ideas. You can use it to brainstorm character ideas. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is that no AI assets, absolutely zero, are actually shipped as temporary or prototype assets. I think it's much more justifiable. But if we're talking about actually selling AI assets, I think that is just wrong, given that we're basically stealing people's data when we use AI. And otherwise, I think, yes, learn to use AI, incorporate it into your workflow. Now, because this is a community-based episode, we're going to invite 3 different people up who have 3 different opinions and use cases for AI to talk a little bit more about it all together. So joining us on stage is a mainstay here at the Indie Game Academy and in these community episodes, and that is Rick Williams. Hi, Rick. How you doing today? Oh, I can't hear you. Mic on? Mic connected? No, I can't hear you. I have a brand new mic, everyone, and it's a nice mic. I spent a lot of money for it. Can't hear you. And it didn't work today. I'm using my Mac's internal microphone. Still can't hear Rick. All right, I'm going to talk. No worries. So Rick here is, oh, I think we just got you. Maybe. Rick here, we decided we would start by talking a little bit about internal and behavioral AI. So the use of AI as agents in game development, meaning having a character walk around the screen and do various AI behaviors. So Rick, would you like to introduce yourself for a second here, and then we'll jump into that as a topic?
Yeah, I'm Rick Williams. I've been a Unity developer for about 10 years now, and I'm a contract developer. I run my own studio that does contracts for people building out educational games, business interactive things, and contracted entertainment products. I also release my own projects with people in the communities that I work with, and I teach boot camps here at IGA.
Heck yeah. Yeah, Rick is somebody that I always refer to as a self-made developer. Rick really did a career pivot. Rick, you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so I've always been very entrepreneurially minded, and I tried a few different businesses. And in 2012, I started a business in construction supply. It's something that tied back to people that I knew. It was my first summer job, and I kind of knew the industry. And after I had done that for a number of years, I had this quarter life crisis where I realized, okay, this is working, but if I only ever sell construction supplies my entire life, I'm going to look back and wish I had made games. So I challenged myself in the summer of 2015 to I'm going to really try to build a complete game core loop, and if I do it, I'm going to commit. I successfully did that, and in the fall of 2025, I committed, and now I'm in a position where rather than waiting for 65 to retire, I can't wait to see what I've achieved by the time I'm 65.
That's awesome. Wow. Yeah, it is really cool to see that you've managed to basically work your way here into the industry and start your own company in this space. So, Rick, let's talk a little bit about the use case of AI in actual agents inside of game development itself, making AI do cool stuff in games. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with that and some of your thoughts on doing that?
Sure. So working with AI, you always have to figure out, AI is something that presents a challenge to the player, and you have to provide something that is engaging, that is fair, but that also works. So there's 3 tiers that I have worked with personally. There is simple AIs. This is going to be just a tower that sits there and shoots you. It exists in a single behavior, and that is it. Then there's finite state machines, which work similar to the animator controllers in Unity, but it's basically you are either patrolling, you're idling, you are attacking, you're dead, right? So usually this will be a case where your enemy will patrol until a condition is triggered. You hit a trigger zone, you press a button, an alarm goes off, something happens, and then they go to attacking mode. So essentially you can imagine your logical loop hits your update function, and then it says, okay, what state are we in? And then you go and you run that separate state of logic in its entirety. That's something that can work very effectively. But the most interesting AIs that I've worked with have come from behavior trees, where you essentially you do have that finite state machine, but then you have it broken up into, this is my movement behavior, this is my logic behavior, this is my attacking behavior. And so this is where you can say, I have an enemy that is going to move, but I'm going to orbit the player. I'm going to walk in a circle around him, or I'm going to just charge straight at him. And then you can combine it with, I'm trying to stay at a mid range, a long range, a close range. You have different kinds of attack behaviors, and you can have a lot more elaborate logic where each of your state machines ends up with a factorial number of possible outcomes in each state based on a number of conditions that are fed to it. So those are much more sophisticated, but they result in something that's a lot more believable and interesting as an enemy to fight.
That's super interesting. My first, one of my first times creating something like that was pretty far back in the day now, I guess, close to 10 years. It was when I was making my cat games. And I wanted to make prey like mice and dragonflies and ladybugs that actually acted like prey, because there was good evidence that that is more successful in making cats actually engage with a device if it acts like if it acts like an actual creature. So it had little it had a couple of like needs. Imagine like The Sims. So it had like hunger, and it had fear levels, and it had like even fatigue levels, so it could rest, and then it had states, and the entrance and exit from those states was controlled by those needs, and that was super interesting and really fun to program. That was one of my very first state machine based AIs.
Yeah, and that sounds like it would work really well where there is, like, let's say, sleeping, foraging, fleeing, right? Like you're in one of those three states, but then to do a behavioral tree, you would have to then feed it information like, this is how hungry I am, this is how tired I am, this is how fearful I am of my life. Like, and then you allow it to behave differently, where even if you're, fearful, but you're very hungry, you have to start making different decisions.
Right. You might be terrified, but if you're hungry enough, you'll still go looking for food. Awesome. Now, I'm curious, given that we're talking a little bit more here in this episode about the newest AI, which is generative language models. How do you think things like ChatGPT and generative models will tie into actual like AI agents in games in the future? What's some of the stuff you've already seen, and then some of the stuff you kind of expect is coming?
So with the AI, when it comes to behaviors, I think that this is where you're going to, like, I know somebody who works on the dialogue system for Unity, and they have made plugins that will actively reach out to the large language models and create procedural feedback for generation. Like, what is the person going to say back to you? And you can actually have a conversation, and it's like chatting with the ChatGPT bot, but you get a lot of interesting feedback. I think as the large language models improve, you're going to start to see that become very, very elaborate and very believable. I know that from a learning standpoint, you might be able to have very sliding scale difficulty adjustments where, they say that there's a balance of difficulty versus the player themselves. So you have, like, if something's too easy, it's boring. If something's too hard, it's frustrating. But if something is just challenging enough to make you feel like you've accomplished something, then you have that engagement where you feel good. And then there's also like a proper cycle where, you want to have a challenge that you overcome, where you then get a power up, and then things are easy for a while, so you can really relish that power, and then you get the challenge again before things get boring. So I think using AI to tailor the actual difficulty of the game and assess the data that comes in is going to be something that will guarantee that difficulty scaling is something that becomes a lot easier to manage, because you can actually track how somebody's doing in much more subtle ways than just, I'm sure we've all played that game where you walk into an encounter and there's 12 enemies and you get wrecked, and then you go in, there's 12 enemies again, and then you go in and there's 6, and it's like, now it's too easy. And that's too incremental, and that feels patronizing. But I think that if you get more nuanced assessment of your game data, AIs can act as a game master in that way to make it fun for players.
really interesting actually, and is a use case of AI I hadn't thought about too much. We experimented a little bit way back with the cat games. We thought we could collect enough data that we could train an AI model to play with the prey to get cats playing more. And we kind of experimented with it a bit, and then it wound up being too much of a mind frag, and we didn't feel like we had enough data anyway, and so we didn't actually do it. But it's already a pretty big area of game design to basically make progressive difficulty or adaptive difficulty is what we usually call it, where depending on how well the player is doing, you actively change the difficulty scaling in the background. When we were doing games at Lumosity, we used to have to make games that had a large enough difficulty curve that you could serve somebody who had actual like mental difficulties all the way up to actual geniuses, and creating a difficulty gradient for that wide of a range of players was really challenging. And it felt like a lot of the time you'd have a bucket that was like theoretically a 2 out of 10 in difficulty, but like one level would be a 9 out of 10. And it was kind of hard to get that quite right, for such a, giant bulk. We had like 8,000 levels per game. So having AI do that is a pretty interesting use case. Here's another question for you. So we've had procedural generation, which is in some ways equivalent to AI generation. That's where we create some clever algorithms that can make an infinite number of levels, for instance, or an infinite number of planets in No Man's Sky, or an infinite number of creatures in Spore. But a limitation of procedural generation is that it all kind of feels the same at the end of the day. You can be better or worse at your implementation of procedural generation to get away from this. But like, if anyone has ever played Daggerfall, or any of the more classic procedural generated dungeons, you know that every damn dungeon winds up feeling exactly the same, even though technically they're different. Do you think we'll run into that same kind of problem with AI generation in games?
So I think that this is where you have to really work within the parameters of what the AI's strengths and weaknesses are. But I think that we're going to end up with a case where people figure out a way to procedurally prompt the AI to use other procedural tools. And it's going to be that procedural AI logic procedural that's going to result in something that's going to be much more in depth. So, you obviously can't do an infinite number of things, but that holy grail is what people refer to as the infinite game, where you have something that continually builds off of something, and it's the missing part of procedural logic that creates that repetitive feeling is the fact that you don't have that ability to generate data from the gameplay experience to then create a feedback loop that creates something else. So if you use the AI, the procedural thing to tell the AI to use procedural tools in a certain way, you get a gameplay experience. Then data from that can be fed back into your original, first procedural step that then prompts the AI to do something and create something else. So I think that kind of a feedback loop is going to be where AI is going to really shine as far as enhancing procedural game development for player experience.
That's interesting. The combination of more classic procedural generation with AI generation. This is a bit random, but Coder Command from the chat has just pointed out something really interesting. So with procedural generation, you can use what's called a seed. When we use any random number generator, we have to feed it a seed, which is basically like a really big number that the random number generator uses to generate random numbers. And if you start with the same seed, you are guaranteed the same random numbers. As a result, I can replay the exact same thing that happened to another player if I start with the same seed, which is incredibly useful for debugging. That's how Minecraft worlds can start from the same seed and you'll wind up with the exact same world, even though it's all procedurally generated. Coder Command points out that with AI generation, you don't have a seed. You can't do that. There's no going back. It's truly unique.
So I think this is actually a really good tie back into when we were talking about the behavioral trees and how they work with FSMs. AI is essentially a way to create dynamic data input that would adjust the way a behavior tree would work, but the AI can intelligently assess what that data that you're working with is and what it should be. And so as you plug into the procedural nature, those are going to be the states that you create, but then the AI informs those extra variants that come in. Something that's not randomly chosen, but chosen according to very sophisticated dissection of data.
Yeah, that's interesting. The method of reproducing the exact same conditions is a little bit more complicated, but probably still possible. All right, we've got at least one question from the audience, which is from John. John asks, "How do you get started in AI development for first timers?" So if I'm looking to make some cool AI, how do I learn to do so?
So is this talking about creating your own enemies?
Yes, I think that is what we're referring to in
Okay.
this case.
Yeah. So when it comes to creating your own enemies, the first thing that you want to do is understand. Honestly, just go on a tutorial, find a tutorial of how to create an enemy. Like that's going to be your first step. And then, keep in mind the buzzwords of finite state machines and behavioral
Hmm.
trees. And try to do research to see how those things are structured and how they work. And then, go in and play with it. A piece of insight that I'll give you from having worked with AIs and pitfalls that I ran into is you need to have a facade pattern. You need to have a hierarchical task structure in how you construct it, because you're going to run into that classic issue of I have my skeleton AI and I'm going to use my sword and I'm going to attack, and then my sword, if there's a skeleton AI, then do the damage to it, and then you're saying, well, now I add a zombie AI. No, okay. Now, if you have a skeleton or if you have a zombie, and then you start ending up with every new enemy that you add, you have to like modify your code and go back.
Hmm.
Figuring out a facade pattern in your structure is very important to create reasonably maintainable code as you extend and add more and more enemies.
Hmm. Which means for the layman, that would mean like rather than asking if I hit a skeleton, you're just asking if I hit an enemy, and both the skeleton and the zombie are considered enemies and share
Yes.
some behavior of the enemy archetype. All right, I'm gonna pull Rick. I'm gonna keep you on stage. I'm gonna pull Horm up on stage here, and we're gonna shift for a second. Rick, you're still welcome to jump in on any other topics as we discuss here. But welcome to the stage, Horm. What's your name?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Horm. That's my actual real name.
Oh, sweet. Welcome to
Yes,
the stage. Sweet.
thank you.
Well, before anything else, why don't we do like mini origin story? Horm, what do you do in games and how'd you get there?
Yeah, so I'm actually a game design student in a game dev school up in northern Sweden. The school is called Future Games. It's my second term in the school right now, and I'll be starting actually working with games in about a year when I start my internship.
Awesome. Nice. Congratulations on that. Not everybody is landing internships these days. Well, sweet Horm, so you told us that you would be able to talk a little bit about the use of AI tooling for the sake of game development. What's your intro there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially for indie games, indie developers, AI can be very powerful and very useful. But not really as a thing that replaces your work, but more as
Hmm.
a personal assistant, I would say. Um, I mean, obviously, AI can literally help you with anything these days, and every part of game dev. Uh, the more obvious ones we can also mention straight away, obviously, is code. Um, but I think I've experimented a lot with code and AI myself, and I think a lot of people coming in see it, um, have a maybe a wrong perspective on it, on how to use it. Like it shouldn't really replace coding for you, but you should use it, especially if you're new to coding, and a lot of game developers are. Then you should use it more as a way to teach you coding, and so not to just replace your work, basically. Um, and one way to do that is first of all ask what's the best way to learn code from AI, etc. Ask it to break down the principles for you, and once you have developed a coding mindset, which is like problem solving, then you can even if you're not familiar with the syntax of a language like C# or C++ for Unreal, then you can start writing pseudocode and then giving the AI your pseudocode, and it can literally just translate the code into syntax for you. Syntax, for anyone that doesn't know, is just I guess how you write code, the coding language.
Mhm.
So it's not
It's
doing the coding
actual
for
hard
you.
code. Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. It's not doing the coding necessarily for you. It's just translating it for you.
That's interesting. All right. So before I go any further, actually, I'd love to hear, for instance, a couple of tools that you might recommend people play with, things like that. But before that, I'm a millennial, and I have boomer parents, and my whole life I've heard well, you can't rely on that too much, or you'll be useless. Calculators, GPS, so many things in my life. That so many pieces of technology that I was promised by my teachers, my parents, that one day I wouldn't have, and I would be doomed that I didn't have it. Do you think that that's the case with AI? Do you think people are shooting themselves in the foot or becoming weaker developers or anything like that if they incorporate the use of AI into their workflow?
Very excellent question. I think there's a very fine line between there for sure. You shouldn't use AI shouldn't become your crutch. Like I mentioned before, it should. I view it more as a personal assistant to make repetitive tasks easier, to help me learn new stuff, etc. So yeah, you shouldn't. It shouldn't do most of your work for you, and you should definitely be careful about using it too much. Because I have felt when I start using it too much, then I just really use it like way too much because it's just so simple to ask for anything and like just not think yourself. But I think the thinking you should always do yourself, and then use the AI for like actual things that you are not. You maybe need to find some more info or the exactly.
Yeah, there's so many cases. Oh, Rick, you've got a thought here?
Yeah, like I think one of the best things is not having the AI try to do the work for you, but treating the AI as, your friend who's read the internet, and you can ask it a question with context and it will quickly recall everything with a reasonable level of accuracy. So like a good example is, let's say C# releases a new version of C#. You go from C#6 to 7 or 7 to 8. And then, there's some new syntax that is put in there and you're just like, what is this? So you like ask the AI, like, what does this line mean? Like, what is the use case for this? And then, to further go, like as people post things on the internet, people post things on Stack Overflow or just educational papers where they say, here is a solution, and then they in text summarize like these are the use cases you would find for it. You can then reverse that where the AI has read that and has it in its data banks, and then you describe the use case. And so rather than spending 2 weeks repeatedly trying different kinds of Google searches and like hoping you eventually find the breadcrumb, you can ask the AI like, here's the use case, here's the context of my problem, and I need a reasonable solution. And it can then read through everything and reverse engineer and spit something out to you where it says like, I found this on the internet, like, is this useful to you? And then you do the processing, but it takes care of the tedious scouring of the endless information on the internet and gives you something reasonably useful.
In my Java 101 class, which was what I got started with in school, I was already programming by then, but it was the first class in my degree. There was a test that we had to take where we were not allowed to Google things. And I understand, the need to test your students and not have them just answer the test by Googling things. But I don't think there's been a single time in my life, maybe like twice, I don't know, where I've been programming and I haven't been able to Google things. It is a quintessential part of how we program. And I think AI basically just fills that exact same hole. As far as the technology thing, I've been thinking about this more lately because I've been trying to, quantify my own feelings about AI. And the human race, since the beginning of time, since the beginning of our existence, has used technology and has moved up the technology ladder and has always relied on its technology. Humans are screwed if our technology fails us or abandons us. But also, I'm sure we'll figure it out. So if you can't argue that it was better before we had fire, then I don't think you can argue that it was better before you had AI. We are an eternally questing species. We're always looking for the next technological leap, and we always incorporate it into our lives. and absolutely let's more ethically use AI. Somebody in the chat mentioned, Just Simi mentioned Call of Duty recently admitting that it uses AI to create final skins for its weapons. That's not cool. That's a definite no-no. So, appropriate use cases of AI, definitely. Make sure you are learning to do things on your own without AI. And I think it is undeniable that you will become weaker if you can only do it with AI. But at the same time, I think you only fall behind if you insist on not learning how to use AI and how to incorporate AI. Horm, before we pull up our third community guest, I would love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you recommend people start playing with? So some of the tools, tutorials, how do people get started incorporating AI tooling into their lives?
A very obvious one, GPT, for anything with code, anything with marketing, or anything you need to write. It can help you use, like, you shouldn't generate like writings, but like check your grammar, especially if you're not a first if your first language is not English like me. Also, I mean, there's a bunch of AI tools. I mean, just ask GPT, honestly, for any. Just ask
Feels like a
GPT
cop-out.
what you need specifically help with. But I mean, for video editing, I just used, for example, like video to text AI to add captions to my videos when I do marketing, for example. I also have a marketing gig for Game Studio. Mixamo, I think, does AI rigging for you. So if you need that, it's very useful if you can't do animations or rigging. Yeah, that's the ones I can think of right now. Also,
Awesome.
try out GPT voice mode. That's super cool for brainstorming. It feels like you're just talking to, you have a brainstorming partner. It's super cool. I've used it so much.
It's called GPT Voice Mod?
Voice mode. You just,
Voice mode.
there's like there's like a special button where you can, where it just turns the text mode into voice mode.
Oh,
And
awesome.
you also
I haven't tried that.
Yeah, you also
Yeah.
get everything you talked about in the text, so it's super useful.
Nice. Misha just asks from the audience, does anyone remember Amazon Alexa? I find myself increasingly annoyed that Siri isn't just a large language learning model. Like, why can't you understand what I'm asking you, Siri? That's great. I think there's a lot of really good AI tools out there. The one that I hear a lot these days for coders is actually GitHub's Copilot. Somebody earlier was asking about Unity Muse. It sounds like, I feel like very few people are actually using that. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. ChatGPT, I also is the one that I still use. It just does everything. So I use it.
Copilot has an integration with Visual Studio, which is, I've actually tried it. It's, yeah, I mean, it's even faster it's even more comfortable than GPT. So yeah, try it out.
Amazing. How about, all right, one last question for you, Horm. What is like a project exercise challenge that people could start with that would be useful, where they would incorporate AI and start to kind of like learn how to do that?
It depends on the use case. So I'd say just getting familiar with AI. Honestly, if you think about like game ideas, like get a game idea, then like use AI as like a rubber duck to bounce back and forth with it. If you're learning coding, ask about what should I focus on first if I learn coding. Then start writing up some code and ask for feedback, etc. Yeah.
Awesome. This actually gives me a good idea for the homework. You're gonna have to stay to the end of the episode, everyone, to find out what the homework is. Cool. Rick wants me to ask ChatGPT what the meaning of life is. All right, we've got a third community guest. This will be our last community guest. Fishy Floor, welcome to the stage. How you doing today? Oh, we have a no signal.
Ooh.
Oh, there we go.
Fun, wrong camera. Sorry about that. I'll
That's
get here
totally
in a minute.
fine. No worries at all. Well, hi, Fishy Floor. Let's do that mini origin story again. Who are you, and how'd you get there?
Sure. I am currently a freelance gaming brand and marketing consultant, and I'm also in the process of starting my own studio. But prior to that, I spent 3 years in both marketing and production at a game studio.
Awesome. That's great. So we get a little bit of the like programmer's perspective into how we use AI, and now we can talk a little about maybe branding and marketing. So Bishop Floor, you mentioned that you use AI tooling quite a lot. Can you tell us about some of your use cases in the past? Oh, hi. We see your face.
Okay. Yeah, so I won't probably go into super specifics about my last job and what we used exactly and how. Other than there was a point I feel like there were a lot of engineers, it's an engineering heavy studio, so there were a lot of people who felt really empowered by this new ability to create graphics. And they went pretty hard trying to more prove that they could do it all. I don't think there was ever a point where anyone else from the outside looked and went like, "Oh yeah, you replaced an artist with that work." So in the end, there was a lot more compromise, and what I feel like I saw and learned from it was really, really great, especially in early stage brainstorm, which we've already talked about, in quickly getting everyone on the same page to look at something without having to wait 2 weeks for a full concept to be developed or for a model to be built from scratch. So just getting everyone enough of the way that they could visualize together and see something, and then you send the artists off to polish, and then you send the coders off to help with other aspects. So that's really where I think it was great. Probably that. And then when engineers were doing projects, I remember reading procedural level generation. If they wanted to test being able to have 6 columns, they could just alter the 6 columns themselves without having to bug an artist and then come back and do the work and then go back to the artist again with the final touch up. So again, that quick iteration, getting things across the line and getting people on the same page, I think it's been super valuable.
Totally agree with that one. I think it's a really good point. Hopefully no concept artists are listening and terrified for their jobs. What you do is
I'm an
still
artist too. I'm a creative, so I feel the pain when people are feeling pain. So
we all feel it. It's definitely a little scary. All of our jobs could hypothetically be replaced. But I totally agree as a way of like really rapid, almost like first pass storyboarding or the equivalent of storyboarding in whatever department you're talking about. So useful. Rather than just going to an artist and like vaguely describing the banner I want, I can like just have AI poop me out something that's kind of approximate. I can be like, okay, it's kind of like this. This is what I'm thinking. Pictures are worth 1,000 words kind of thing. I think that's a super, super powerful use case. And then that group collaboration is great too. I've been in a couple of brainstorming sessions where we're all kind of like sitting on Midjourney and we're just like mid-journeying pictures together and throwing them back and forth. Midjourney is another tool for AI image generation if people are not familiar. And that's been super valuable as well. Are there in the branding, marketing, and let's say like let's broaden that a little bit, community building, the whole side of game dev that is, hey, please come look at my game. Where do you think AI is best used, and how do you think this room is full of indie developers who are trying to figure out how to get their games noticed while spending as little dollars as possible? So what are some of your maybe lessons or wisdom for them?
My reaction to that, I feel like I have seen a lot more straight out of AI and onto the internet, which has been disappointing. I'm pretty sure it's been a lot around everywhere, but the Fantastic Four poster that Disney released, and you could just tell that it was AI generated and they didn't bother cleaning it up. And I'm like, you guys are huge. You have the money, you have the resources. Why did you let this out the door? But then I'm seeing that at every scale. So I excuse it a lot more for like a 2-person company that's really busy and they're like, hey, I don't have the skills, the time, the capacity to do this. But I don't like that that's a trend. But I find it super helpful in a marketing sense when I'm brainstorming too, like getting cool taglines, or maybe even like you're not sure about the title of your project yet, and you can start talking about your project and here, can you give me like a whole bunch of words that could be associated with this game? And then you're like, ooh, I love that word. And then you build on that. And it's this conversation you have with AI to make something that maybe would take you a lot longer. I think that's where it's been helpful for me. But I mean, any of like the logo generators, I've never been a fan of. They're super generic. You're not going to stand out. You're just going to look like everyone else. And I've heard this in the same sense from resumes. Is like if you're generating all your resumes and all your cover letters, you're never going to get a job, sorry, because you sound like a robot and everyone else's resumes who's using that is exactly the same as you. So therefore, you are just everyone. Yeah. And so that's kind of how I feel about using it too heavily in marketing. If you can train a model to have your brand voice and generate you a bunch of content, I do it for my personal stuff. And I'm like, I'm stuck. I need to create content. I'll dump a whole bunch of my old posts. And again, you should start with something that you've done yourself. feed a model based on those things, and then go, I need 13 ideas for LinkedIn posts about my game. And then, okay, great, I got some ideas. Again, go edit, add some graphics that you feel are appropriate, however you generate those, and then you can post them. But I think that it's just great to kind of get me out the door when I'm feeling stuck.
I love that. That's a tip into and of itself, actually, that last thing that you mentioned. You can train a model on how you speak and how your studio speaks and the kinds of content you post. And you can get a lot out of that model once it's trained up. And it's a lot easier to train a model than that sounds, I think, to anyone who hasn't tried it yet.
I was intimidated too. It's not that bad, I promise.
Yeah, it's pretty trivial even. It's really not that hard. So that's a great tip for anyone. I agree. The straight from the AI to the social media platform is just dross and will not is barely better than no post at all. Maybe isn't better than no post at all. So don't do that. It's not useful. Imagine, I think this is actually where I'd like to finish, and this is for everyone. Imagine what the future of game development will become as AI becomes more and more powerful. The barrier to entry on things like posts, but as well as just game development period, making and releasing games, will become lower and lower, which means we'll have more and more games. We are already at the point where there are well over 1 million games in the iOS store. About 70 games get released to Steam a day. The average mobile game never makes back the $100 that it costs them to put the game up on the store. And a lot of that is because there are, frankly, so many games that get released, and the vast majority of them are just not that high quality. So it's an interesting future. I would love to hear each of your thoughts on what the future of game development looks like given AI. In my opinion, there will be a ton of dross, so many games. But I think the actual dynamics won't change that much of your game in its relation to the marketplace, because it'll still be about high quality. It'll still be about personal touch. It'll still be about basically being human and expressing your humanity. Curious what you three think. What's the future of game dev given AI? Why don't we go in?
Everyone's muted.
Perfect. I was about to call you out.
I've been thinking about this a lot actually this week, because I'm in this starting phase of entrepreneurship right now and evaluating the landscape and where I need to go in it. But one thing I feel like is truly missing, I was playing all of the Next Fest games on Steam right now, and there's so many. I initially hopped in to look for a specific game. I scrolled through about 12 tabs of just all these games coming out. So it's overwhelming. And I think in the same way that AI is going to breed us all to be more like creative directors than actual producers, I think that there's a lot of space to curate games that are coming out. Like, there'll be more platforms for people like Kind of Funny or IGN, but like in a very niche space. Maybe you focus on cozy games and you are just the best person at picking out and finding these really cool cozy games. And people will then go to you to find things in this giant mess of a Steam library. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to just curate and help people discover, because the discovery tools, I think, where I find there's a challenge just to find what you're looking for. Like, oh, I only want women developed games for right now. I just want to check out what's out there. I want to see people who are using AI in behavioral interactions and where that's at right now. But it's hard to find that just going out there and searching on your own.
That's really interesting. And I think actually brings up a good point. Like, AI tools will find their way into every aspect of our lives. So there will also be AI tools for discoverability. Hey, I really want a game made by a single developer in under 3 months from Mexico that's just for single dads, and you'll get them. AI will be able to do that for you. Very interesting future. Horm, what do you think? What's the future of game dev and the game industry look like given AI?
Very interesting. I mean, it's gonna help indie games especially so much with limited resources.
Indie revolution.
Yeah. But I mean, like, development times are gonna go down, development costs, and the people who are adopting AI now will definitely have an advantage, especially when AI becomes even more advanced and the stuff that it puts out is less and less sloppier or slop. So I think it will be a lot of people doing solo dev with AI, a lot of smaller teams, producing a lot higher quality games in shorter times with AI. And yeah, I think it'll just be a lot more higher quality games than with less resources and with less time.
I think your case.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and the people who get on it early will probably have the advantage.
I think that's absolutely a big takeaway. This is a part of what we were saying towards the beginning. I think it is. There's a lot of people who resist AI fundamentally, and I totally get why you do. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong for resisting AI, but if you're talking about being competitive in the marketplace, I think it's just frankly you kind of have to, and let's like do it while insisting on it being more ethically used.
We should definitely stay ethical. I totally agree, even as a AI enthusiast.
Yeah, AI should replace jobs as little as possible. It should be a supplement to our lives, make our lives better.
Yeah.
Fisher, your statement about becoming creative directors is really interesting. I think that is, in my opinion, the future. AI will, period, no argument here, get closer and closer and eventually indistinguishable from human work. The creativity side, I'm not sure it will ever be able to match us. I don't know, though. It could, maybe. But as far as like I tell it to make this thing and it makes it perfectly, we will get there, period. So, eventually that's what our lives look like. Eventually we'll have a holodeck from Star Trek. Rick, what do you think the future of game dev looks like?
So it's perfect that you said, the creativity and how do you get there. I think that we're going to achieve that by having an AI tool that can be used to generate further AI tools. So this is where you can say like I am an artist and I want to have an art tool that will generate art for me, and you can say this is the kind of art that I want to create and I would like you to create a GUI for me with these sliders, and so you can start to develop a way to refine the kinds of prompts, and you can ask for it very specifically. Because of the nature of game development and how unique every project can be, every deliverable can be, you need to be able to tailor the output of the AI to your specific needs. So like, for example, a project management tool, like these are the people that we have, and this is the best way for us to create a development pipeline. So I want to get a custom tool. Like I don't want to just use Monday. I don't want to just use Notion. Like this is the workflow that I want to use. And you can ask it to create something that will keep track, and you can say like, okay, cool. So this is how we're going to assign our tasks, and this is the follow-up rhythm. And AI, I want you to schedule the follow-ups, like have somebody who will actually do that, and you can work in the AI as an assistant tool to help you through that. So I think the real crux point is when there is a very easily usable tool to create bespoke tools that are powered by AI task management and generative AI.
That's really interesting. The concept of like the tooling won't be pre-generated content like a Monday.com, and instead will be something that we just ask for from AI is pretty fascinating. That's a fundamentally like revolutionary future, like that looks so different from what things look like right now. I definitely think at the end of the day, maybe my last statement is I am largely hopeful for how AI pushes humanity forward. I think it absolutely could be a dystopian tool. It absolutely could be something that replaces jobs and winds up being overall negative for humanity. But I think one of the ways that we make it not that is that we push for that. We insist on that. So absolutely push for what you believe in AI. Absolutely get mad at people when you think they are using AI inappropriately. Absolutely ask for AI to be sourced and used ethically. And I think at the end of the day, I mostly believe that it'll be hard for AI to ever actually replace us. And I think most people feel that too once they've used AI enough, because it is still, even in the future where it can make anything perfectly, even in the Star Trek future, it is still fundamentally actually pretty limited, and requires human input to really do or anything or matter. Maybe my last statement is about hand-generated goods. When you get a handmade garment, it means more to you than a garment that was created by an industrial press. And it is not because it was made it is not because of the quality or anything like that. It is inherently simply because human hands touched it and human work was put into it. And I think that's something that probably we will never escape. So even in that Star Trek future, it'll still matter that, this person actually did it by hand, even if maybe it's worse than AI did it. That's my belief system. So don't be scared of AI. But try to make sure it's used in the right way and doesn't make everyone a dystopic, awful future. Fishy Floor, I feel like you have a final statement here.
No, I compare this to people when I was talking to artists about adopting this early. We did the comparison of like painting to the camera being invented, and how painting didn't disappear. It just had a different place in the way that we used it and how it was valued. So I would say the same goes here. Like, there's always going to be value in what you do, what you've learned, the skills you have. The way you apply them, though, might just be a little bit different. So skills never go away. I came from industrial design. I love a handmade chair. It will cost more, but there is so much more value to it. So you're just in the same wave as me. So I just have to share that.
100%. That's great. Awesome. So that's where we'll leave it. The last thing I will do is give people some homework. Horm, you gave me kind of a homework idea. Here is an interesting one. I want everyone to go from concept, so including concept, to fully released game using, maybe not released, to fully playable at the very least game using AI only. So I want you to go and talk to the AI and say, hey, I need to make a game in like an hour. What's a game that I can make in an hour to practice using AI tools? You're going to ask an AI that, maybe ChatGPT. ChatGPT will give you some ideas. Work with that. Go back forth with ChatGPT a little bit until you find a game idea that you genuinely believe you can make in like an hour with ChatGPT. Then make it using ChatGPT or any other AI tool for that matter. Try out maybe Copilot or anything else. And go from literally asking the AI for an idea that fits your constraints, your boundaries, all the way to a finished game using AI. That's going to be a super powerful little experiment for you. If you don't want to jump into the coding side of it, you can always kind of modify this exercise, maybe make like a storyboard or the world Bible or something like that. What is your equivalent in your field that feels a little bit more approachable for you? But I encourage you, honestly, just to try to make the entire game, because it's never bad, no matter what your discipline is, for you to learn some code. All right, that's going to do it. This is actually, I love our community episodes. They're always a ton of fun. Thank you, everybody, for coming. As always, we're here every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time in the Discord. There are links to join us down below. And yeah, stop by to ask your own questions live. Thank you to Horm, Fishy Floor, and Rick for being our community guests today.
Thanks for having us.
Heck yeah. All right. Cheers, everybody. Have a great day.
Cheers. Have a good night.